This is to just sensitize people that following this project, one of the things that CABI would be involved with in partnership with the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund is that we got funding to do a networking forum for key biodiversity areas in the Caribbean. The Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund supports biodiversity protection in the key biodiversity areas, and there are quite a few of them. Out of these many key biodiversity areas in the Caribbean, the ones in Jamaica, Bahamas, Antigua, the Dominican Republic, and St. Lucia are affected by invasive alien species. And this project really is to create a network, a virtual network, and with the main purpose of really sharing experiences between the partners in these countries to strengthen the ability to protect the biodiversity in these areas, really, and to mainstream invasive alien species into the issues into the wider national policy and regional policy, etc. So to be brief, because I know everybody wants to go home, and I'm speaking to the converted, the key biodiversity areas is really areas of high biodiversity, right? And we're all aware from presentations during the week the importance of the Caribbean as a biodiversity hotspot. So I'm not going to go too much into the background slides. We already discussed some of the complexities from Ulrike's presentation, for example, in terms of managing invasive species in the Caribbean. So these are some of the hotspots. The one with the red marks are the areas in which the project would be specifically focusing on. But what I want to say is with the CEPF agreement is that it is not, although the funding is for these 5 countries, we are able to open it up to the entire Caribbean. So for example, if you have an experience in one country that is not participating in the project and you want to come on and do a webinar or share your experience, or if we're doing a webinar or we're dealing with an issue that is of importance to your country, you're willing to welcome and be part of it. It's just we don't have any funds to directly sponsor you to anything or to do work directly on your behalf. But it is for the benefit of the wider Caribbean. And CABI would be looking for funding in the future to expand this. So Boris, you can give us some money. So the objective really is to protect the threatened endemic species in these key biodiversity areas. And we've heard of some of these. For example, the whole efforts of the project on cabritos, for example, is a good example of that. The ones in St. Lucia and Antigua. These are the ones, some damaging, protecting the endangered one from the damaging species like these. You have the iguana giant African snail. So the objective of this project really is to form a virtual network of stakeholders working in key biodiversity areas in this Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund priority countries of Antigua and Barbuda, Bahamas, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and St. Lucia. Now, these are not the key countries for the CPF in the Caribbean. I think there are 11 key countries in the Caribbean. These are the countries of importance with respect to invasive alien species. That's the distinction. So we are conducting a critical situation analysis of the key biodiversity areas in these 5 countries, and at the end of the project we would have a complete document on what the situation is with respect to these the the biodiversity in these 5 countries in their KBAs with respect to invasive alien species, and compile a review document of the 45 KBAs in the Caribbean. So beyond the key ones that we are focusing in the project, we would also do a review of all the key biodiversity areas with their situation with respect to invasive alien species. To enable local and regional networking, sharing best practices in IS management and control and capacity building. So for example, all the good lessons we've learned over the week in terms of communication, in terms of eradication, in terms of protection, etc., those would now be taken up and shared with the NGOs and so on, working in these key biodiversity areas in these 5 countries. So some of the key actions: we've created an online skills register, and again, that is not limited to the 5 countries. Any one of you in this room qualified to register as an expert, whether it's in communication, eradication, prevention, doing research, whatever. You can go in and register as an expert. So when people in the wider region and the wider world looking for expertise in managing invasive alien species, this would be a place that they can actually find resources, human resources. We're going to be hosting regular webinars and discussion forum to facilitate exchange of experiences among stakeholders across countries on managing IS and protecting biodiversity. And these experts hopefully would come, that's the other reason why we're having this experts register, so we can find expertise to do these type of discussions. We're also going to, via Skype and webinar and so on, host experts from outside of the region. So for example, we're working very closely with Landcare, as you've seen, the ISSG group in Auckland, New Zealand, with lots of experiences with people like Arnie, within CABI, etc., to do this type of information sharing in a sort of a virtual kind of way, in terms of spreading the message and in building up capacity at the NGO level in these 5 countries. So part of the funding that we got is that we would, after the critical situation analysis of the KBAs in the 5 countries, we would do a gap analysis and do some bit of training in these 5 countries in terms of building the capacity of those groups to do and manage invasive alien species and protect the biodiversity. So again, we will be drawing on some of the experiences that we had over this week in doing some of that. And then at the end of the day, we would have a regional workshop to sort of a launch in a formal kind of way, a coordinating mechanism that would get towards protecting the KBAs. And again, the CPF has agreed that we can quite easily open this up once it's not using their funding to the wider Caribbean. So people who are not in the areas of the KBAs, for example, in Cabritos, it's one of the KBAs, so all the NGOs working in Cabritos, even if you have people outside of the Cabritos and Alto Velo, the ones that are regarded as KBAs for CPF, and want to be part of the whole networking effort, you're totally welcome to be part of that. If anybody in Trinidad wants to learn how they are doing things in the DR and Bahamas and Antigua and so on, because there are success stories to learn from, that you can be part of the network and you can use some of the information, use the expertise to do the kind of work that you're doing. For example, the NGOs that are existing in Trinidad, because Trinidad is not part of this project, whether it's turtle conservation or whatever. There are lessons to be learned from the others in the region. And it's basically a project to share experiences, to network, and to mainstream the issue of invasive species in the wider Caribbean. I think I mentioned some of those. So some of the expected outcomes at the end of the day is that we would have documented working with the local NGO and stakeholders the impacts of invasive species on the KBAs and to highlight the potential threats and pathways for the introduction to the KBAs and strengthen stakeholders' capacity to passively and actively conduct surveillance of invasive alien species that are likely to affect these KBAs. Also, we'll engage in some appropriate action to curtail identified threats to important biodiversity that is found in the KBAs. Again, working with, at the national and regional level. So hopefully the situation in Goat Island, for example, I don't know to what extent if we can have a Caribbean voice to help the people working in that specific location in terms of changing policy. That's a tricky one, I know, and to some extent donors don't like you getting involved in these political type things, but if by sharing scientific information in terms of sharing with the wider community the importance of the area, etc., I think those are the kinds of ways we can work as a region to help each other in if you want to call it crisis situations, to make a difference. So in conclusion, the Caribbean islands are centers for some of the world's greatest biodiversity and endemism. However, they are highly threatened, and their management gaps as well as important areas that lack necessary protection. So in closing, I'd like to thank you, and I would like to acknowledge Rafiq Bailey, Dr. Rafiq Bailey, who's based in St. Vincent, and basically he's the one that developed the presentation. He is also the part-time regional coordinator for managing the project. Now I think I'd have a little bit more time to be a lot more involved with it. So thank you, Annie.